Hi, I'm Stu Heinecke, author of How to Grow Your Business Like a Weed. And the best advice I ever got is actually from weeds. They tell me, deal with what is. Isn't that great advice? Deal with what is. It's hard to do.
Ooh, I love that. Deal with what is. Well, what
Just,
is this awesome book?
yes,
Congratulations,
that's
Stu.
right.
Congratulations.
Oh my
So,
God, thank you.
wow. So tell me about this. Deal with what is. What does that mean?
Well, I was driving down the freeway a long time ago, and I noticed this dandelion growing from a crack in the concrete median in the freeway, and I decided, well, that's really interesting. I mean, we've seen weeds, we see them doing that all the time, right? They grow out of all kinds of cracks in concrete everywhere. But that one time it really struck me, and I thought, look at it. It looks happy. Those happy yellow flowers are kind of bouncing around in the turbulence of, the smoggy turbulence probably, and the seeds are going off in all different directions, and it was just running its process. And I thought, that is just incredible. That's so impressive. How is it doing that? And does it have the weeds? Like, how do they do this? I mean, we see the seeds, they fly around and they probe every possible opportunity to take root, which is what we should be doing as entrepreneurs, by the way, right? I mean, it just really fits. But I just thought, but what is it about weeds? Because there's no like other kinds of plants growing out of there's not like polite plants. There are no apple trees growing out of cracks in the concrete medians and freeways, nothing like that, or petunias. So how is it, what's so special about weeds? What do they have a model that they all use to grow? And if they do, is it applicable to our business? And they do have one. And I think it's the theory of everything about growing anything. And one of the sort of basic tenets is they don't have they have this incredible mindset. You can see it. You see it in evidence. That's how when they grow back, and when you cut them down and they come right back and all that. They don't have emotions like we do. So they don't go like, if we cut them down, they don't go, well, geez, that really sucks. I mean, if they hadn't have pulled me, I would have been this much taller. They don't do anything like that. They just deal with what is. They don't let any of those. They don't have emotions, so they don't let emotions get in the way, and we do. So it's really easy to say it as a deal with what is, but so many people are dealing with what they thought they deserved, or where they would have been if only this hadn't happened. Any of those things or I just don't feel like doing it, or I feel depressed, or whatever. Just get all that crap out of the way and deal with what is, and deal with it with urgency and aggression and resilience and so on. Just deal with what is. It's really hard to do. It's kind of like, in stocks, that advice that we get, buy low, sell high. Well, duh, but it's really hard to do.
Yeah, it is really hard to do. I mean, removing the emotion is almost inhuman, but yet it does absolutely help with business. And I think one of the most fascinating things, first, that you found that you found truly the most appropriate metaphor for a small business ever, right? As a weed, that totally makes sense. But secondly, that you unpacked all these different qualities of weeds that once you say them are so stinking obvious, but until you hear them, they're like, well, I don't know about that. So one of the things that struck me as you did that is you talked about the mindset of a weed. And I'm like, what? Like, they're like, okay. So, but two things came out of that. And I thought that was really interesting. And that was optimism and persistence. Optimism and persistence. And as I think about that, right, that's a lot. That, like, in some cases, that's the only quality I have, is optimism and persistence. So how do weeds have optimism, first of all, and then we'll move into persistence?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I mentioned the dandelion that started all this for me. That it looked optimistic. It didn't look like it was saying, well, this sucks. I really saw myself as living at the beach, or something like that. It was just running its process happily. And so here's the thing of what I mean about, because it really does sort of bleed off from deal with what is, because if the weeds could talk to us, I think what they'd say is, look, we don't have emotions, so they don't get in our way, but we see that your emotions always get in your way. So what we would suggest is, rather than leading your actions with your emotions, turn it around. Let your actions lead your emotions. So, for example, I think one of the really great devices for this for us is working out. And so my wife and I went to the gym this morning before getting on this on your show. And whether you feel like it or not doesn't matter. Go do it. And I think actually working out manufactures optimism, and certainly acting as letting your actions lead your emotions rather than the other way around does it does it just manufactures optimism. It's kind of it's a weird thing to consider. Like, for example, also weeds even having a mindset, right? They don't have brains, so how on earth could they have a mindset? But you can see it, and you mentioned, Phil, that like a lot of these things are obvious, but you didn't. It's like the experiences, but I didn't put them all together. And I think that one of the brilliant things about what weeds do and what their model is it helps us take all these pieces of things we've noticed and things that we've practiced, and we put them all together, and it's this universal framework for growth. It's really amazing. Almost anything that we do that's productive, anything that we do that's let's say an area of expertise within business, all seems to fit within that growth model.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I like that, I like that you talk about action leads to optimism. I think that's really important for folks to hear, because being stuck, and certainly I've been stuck. I'm sure you've been stuck, right? Being stuck, that
Yeah.
inaction would absolutely lead to pessimism and I'm going to say little d depression, right? Like, oh, this sucks. Oh, I hate this. I wish things would be better. But once I get my butt in gear and I take action, I think that absolutely helps us. And I think, action leads to optimism. With that, right, we have to stay the course, right? We have to be persistent about that. And I think that was super interesting how you put that in there. You talked about that persistence isn't pesty. Persistent isn't pesty. And then you use an example of some guy who sent 89 emails and on the 90th email finally got the deal. And I think that was a story from our friend Alice Hyman. I can't remember. But I was like, really? So that's not pesty. So talk to me about how that persistence cannot be pesty.
Well, I think, again, here's what's going to happen as a result of, if you listen and watch this interview, I'm pretty certain that you're going to be saying, you in the audience, that you're going to be saying, well, I saw weeds one way, and then all of a sudden this has changed. It's sort of like, I don't know if there's a term for this. I've been searching for it. Maybe there isn't one, but something that you see one way and then it gets changed, gets turned slightly, and you see completely different facets in it. And suddenly it's like it went from one, let's say maybe a very negative impression, which is what we have of weeds, to something incredibly positive about weeds. And you're going to go into your garden, you're going to go into your yard. I mean, if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, you're not going to see them do much yet, but when springtime comes, you'll see them do a lot, and you'll be going, oh my God, here comes the weeds. And they're hard to control. And there's a reason for that. It's because they're so darn good at growing and taking over turf, taking over territory. I mean, I would say that turf and just square footage of area coverage is analogous to, let's say maybe market share for us. And they're really good at taking it over, aren't they? So when we watch and we see what they do, and in particular persistence, just watch what happens when you try to get rid of them in your yard. They're not going anywhere. And I'm not saying give in, let them grow in your yard, but you've got to admire what they're doing. Watch what they're doing, because you'll learn from them as well. And they don't give up. They just don't stop. If you cut down, I don't know, dandelions are so well known. So we'll talk about dandelions. So if you knock down a dandelion, if you pluck it or something, as long as the root is there, it's coming back, and it'll keep coming back, and it'll keep coming back, because that's its process. And their process is just, it's programmed into their DNA. They just run it like a computer runs a program, and their process. I was about to say it's everything, and it's not everything, but it's their evolution. It is very central to them, and they follow a process. Here's what the model is. I mentioned that there's a unified model. So is that they leverage a fierce mindset and unfair advantages against collective scale, and they do it according to a process that, in their case, is millions of years old, but so it's ancient. I mean, it's really well honed also, but it's also a living process, and it's engineered in such a way, or structured in such a way, that it changes whenever the species encounters a challenge. So And so when that happens, it evolves. It's also the revolution. So it allows them to evolve right around that challenge and neutralize it. Does that make sense? Because I've got a great example
Hmm.
of what a weed that
Yeah,
did
give
that.
us an example. Yeah, give us an
Yeah.
example.
Well, there's a weed that's it's currently invading farmland and well, let's say farmland anyway, and probably other disrupted ground, but farmland across North America. So this water hemp plant, that's what it's called, water hemp. And this thing, dandelions, we're familiar with them. We see their seeds. I mean, yeah, we see the seeds flying around. If you have dandelions in your lawn, you'll notice that there's not one, there's lots of them, and there might be hundreds of them. And each one, and when they start going to seed, well, they live 5 to 10 years. So over that lifespan, each plant puts out an average of 15,000 seeds, which is a lot of seeds. If you have hundreds of dandelions in your lawn times 15,000, that's a lot of, they're not leaving. But water hemp is an annual. So every year, each instance of the plant, lives and dies, and then the next generation comes up through seeds. So seeds are seed production. And everything about seeds is their highest priority. Those plants produce up to 4.8 million seeds per plant, not
Wow.
15,000 over 5 to 10. 4.8 million seeds per plant. That plant is never going anywhere. Now, the other thing, though, is that because I mentioned that they meet challenges quickly, and so farmers use herbicides to control weeds. If they don't, then the weeds they grow faster than all the crop plants, and they'll steal all the sunlight, and it directly interferes with growing crops. So they use herbicides, and one of those is glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup, pretty deadly stuff. Well, water hemp, it developed immunity to glyphosate in 4 years. It
Wow.
happens because they produce so many seeds, and there are these useful mutations. It's kind of like R&D almost. Well, certainly it's evolution, but there are these useful mutations that take over. And so the useful mutations were the ones that weren't affected by glyphosate, and then that became the new species. I mean, the new version of the species. It's incredible how quickly they evolve around these challenges. So we should be doing that too. A lot of businesses don't even have a process, or they don't have a recorded process, and without it, I'm like, there's nothing to sell. I
Yeah.
mean, well, you could sell products and services, but you don't have a business to sell. At the end of the run, there's nothing. You're not building anything. You've got to have
Yeah.
process. So
Nothing repeatable, right?
right, repeatable and trainable, and in our case, process is how we map experience and expertise across an entire organization, so that the whole thing runs at the highest level possible. And if you don't have a way of transferring that to a buyer, then you don't have a business to sell. So it's just all around. It's just really important. Those four elements. So mindset and unfair advantages and collective scale and process are how weeds take over the earth.
Wow. Wow, that's so amazing. So let's dive a little bit more into persistence here because that was fascinating to me. One of the things that you said, you quoted entrepreneur Jay Kim. He said that parts of being persistent is mastery of the craft. And I think that's very interesting because, often we talk about charisma or energy or, shiny, the design even. And Jay says, no, no, hold on. Let's talk about mastery of a craft. So what can you explain that more and how that connects with your weeds?
Well, I think, what I think it does actually. I mean, it certainly takes persistence to do that, right? And who said it that you have to practice something 10,000 times before you're
Yeah, Gladwell
proficient?
said that in Tipping Point. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so that's right. Yeah. So I mean, but look, I think it translates into more than just persistence and more than just mastery, because mastery is one of those things. I mentioned unfair advantages. I'm fascinated with those because if you don't have unfair advantages, you don't survive as a business. And so mastery of something unique and interesting becomes an unfair advantage. Because it's unfair because your competitors probably aren't putting in the 10,000 attempts first or practices before before it's perfected. And I'll give you it's like a very personal example of that is I write these books and I'm a marketer, but I'm also one of the Wall Street Journal cartoonists. And I had this amazing mentorship with some of the greatest cartoonists in the world from Playboy and the New Yorker when I first started out. And it all kind of happened by accident, but it was great. And I've been mastering it my whole career. And so when I show up as one of the Wall Street Journal cartoonists, that's just, if I'm using that, let's say, to get meetings, and that does work to get helps me and it helps my clients get meetings, that's an unfair advantage because the people who try to compete with me, who try to copy it, and there've been a lot of them who've tried to copy it, doesn't work. They don't know what they're doing. They haven't put the work in. And so that just putting the work in becomes an unfair advantage. One of many, but putting the work in and becoming a master of something means that, well, who's going to compete with you? Like, how are they going to do it? They can't match it because they haven't put the work in.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's like a head start that happened 10 years ago. So it's like that overnight success that took 25 years to go. How do you replicate 25 years worth of work? That's your
Yeah,
unfair advantage,
immediately.
right?
Right.
Yeah. Immediate. Yeah. When snapping the
Yeah.
fingers, now I'm as good of a cartoonist as Stu. No, that's
Nope.
not how this works, right? It's not, I would say, right, it's not just the name, which certainly helps, right? I mean, the
No. Yeah.
unfair
Yeah.
advantage being that, but it's also the work that you've done is an unfair advantage because you're starting from square seven, whereas I'd be starting at square zero. Is that right? Am I understanding that
Yeah.
correctly?
Yeah. Not only that, so I had that mentorship with the cartoonist, but I'm a really unusual form of cartoonist because I'm a marketer and a cartoonist, and I've been using cartoons in marketing my whole career. And so every time I produce a campaign for a client, well, I get the benefit of, well, of course I get paid, but I get the benefit of learning from whatever it is that we did, whatever we tried differently. I'm a repository of test results that's unmatched anywhere in the world of using personalized cartoons, personalization with cartoons. And so it's not just getting good at drawing and writing funny gags, it's directing it based on test experience that no one else has. So those are two great examples of unfair advantages. By that I mean, some people are going to bristle at the word unfair. It's not really unfair. It's being ultra competitive, putting yourself, as Chris, his mind. I mean, his name went right out of my head as I was about to say his name. Christopher Lockhead, I think it is. Um, he talks about a category of one, becoming a category of one, or the authors of Blue Ocean Strategy talk about avoiding the red ocean, go to the blue ocean where there are no competitors. The place where there are no competitors is the place where you are a category of one. And that's a totally, let's go back to weeds now, weeds model. That's a totally unfair advantage, one of many that you can cultivate. So, and you want to be doing that. You want to be thinking in terms of cultivating unfair advantages. Phil, I'm going to say, now I don't know if I could call it unfair advantage, but your glasses are part of your personal brand. Like, we know exactly. We see the glasses. We know exactly. We know exactly, and the smile, and we know exactly who we're talking to, right? I mean, you could almost trademark those. Maybe you have. I don't know, but and it's not that someone couldn't also get glasses, but they'd just be a pale imitation. And I know that you talk a lot about gratitude, and of course we could all. Well, I hope I hope we all have gratitude for what we're doing and what we get to have and do in life. But you're mastering it in a way that is it's really tough to match it. And I know that's not what you sell, but that's part of. Well, maybe it's sort of in speaking, but it's part of your brand and it's part of your sort of assets of your unfair advantages that sets you apart from everyone else.
Yeah, absolutely. I haven't trademarked any of those, but I totally agree, right? I mean, people do recognize me by my glasses. I was at dinner here in Orlando at a conference, 10,000 people at HR Florida, and I walk in and somebody goes, "Hey, Phil Gervishak." He's like, "I saw you from the glasses." I'm like, "Really? Cool, right?" But when you say it, it totally makes sense, right? It
Yeah.
totally makes sense in that, sometimes we don't even know that we have an unfair advantage. So sometimes it's nice to have a smart friend like you who can help us point that out. So sometimes we can hire a brand person or, I have a brilliant friend and sometimes that helps us too in business. And you talk about that, right? You talk about how to cultivate that and how to maybe find a naming agency to find that because, Nike and Google and Amazon, right? They're not descriptive. really of what they do, but
Yeah.
they are kind of unfair advantages because they're simple. So, can you talk a little bit more about naming and why that's an unfair advantage as well, or why that's part of weed strategy?
Yeah, well, I think it's naming is or having great names, having a catchy name or a name that you just go, oh, okay, that was really clever. Is something that and causes people to remember it. Okay, I'm going to reveal something. There's a I don't know if it's going to go, but there's a TV. There might be a possibility of a TV show. I go out and I help companies apply um, weed strategy to the business so that they can grow the business. And I will be known as, oops,
The
the chief
chief
weed
weed
officer.
officer.
And I think that's a
Cool.
pretty cool name, right? It's
Yeah.
memorable, and it's you go, oh, okay, that's kind of cool. Okay, and of course, he's not talking about the weed you smoke. Well, I mean, I think that's obvious now, right? but, but I think there actually will be chief weed officers in the future, actually, who will be in charge of running weed strategy for their businesses. But having catchy stuff. I mean, oh, and this kind of leads to another place. But I in the book I said, okay, I'm going to be launching a new award. It's going to be called the Total Weed Award. So I get to call people. This is going to be fun. I get to call people Total Weeds, and they're going to be going, "Oh my God, Stu, thank you so much." So I'm already doing that, and it's fun. But now it'll be institutionalized, and it'll be an actual award. And a total weed. I mean, like I Phil, you're such a total weed. It's a memorable thing. So I
Yeah.
know you were talking about my friend Alexander Watkins runs a naming lab called Eat My Words, and she's brilliant at it. I mean, I couldn't possibly do what she does. She's so creative at this, but she comes up with names that cause people to they're memorable and but they're more like I said, they're memorable because they're interesting and they're kind of unique, but they're also sort of mnemonic devices. So that becomes the kind of the unfair advantage because you'll remember their name versus other names, and I mean, that just makes a difference. The thing is, there could be a lot of different kinds of unfair advantages that you can cultivate in your business. And uh, I don't want to make it a long answer, but there's a really cool unfair advantage I'm cultivating right now around the Total Weed Award and around it's really kind of helping the book that is becomes a new unfair advantage. We could pile a lot of layers of unfair advantages onto our businesses, and the more we do that, the more opportunities it opens to collaborate with others and just really to explode the scale of what you're doing. Does that make sense?
Wow. It makes a lot of sense. And that's so amazing, right? There's so much there on the unfair advantage. I mean, that you could almost, say being a weed is an unfair advantage just in itself, right?
Oh,
Like if you can
yeah.
even think like that, right? You're changing that and you're growing like that and you're being more memorable, which is creating another unfair advantage, Not every weed is the same, though they have similar characteristics. I mean, wow, there's so much
Well,
there to unpack, Stu.
you know what? Even the weeds themselves are my unfair advantage, if you can imagine that. Because, like all the weeds that show up in your yard, I said that at the end of the book. Those weeds in your yard, they're working for me now because they are my meme. Like, they'll show up all over the world, and I hope people are going to be saying, "Oh God, here comes those weeds again." But wait a minute, there's that book, right? So they become a mnemonic device for me. It's like everywhere, and they keep showing up every year, everywhere, zillions of them. So yeah, all kinds of unfair advantages that can cause your business to, as a result, just explode.
Yeah, that's so good. So Stu, as we wrap this up, buddy, where do we get started on the weed strategy? Where do we start? Because there's so much here that we could go deeper in. I mean, the book is absolutely fantastic. I read it and I'm like, wow. And then I read it again. I'm just getting new stuff. I mean, I've got tons of notes here, but let's get started. Obviously, they should buy the book, but where else should they get started, Stu?
Well, my gosh, we're starting to put together weekend growth summits all over the world. And you can join us at any of these. So I think the first one is going to be at the Louvre, actually, in April.
Wow.
We're doing these in all kinds of bucket list locations. So we have one setting up for the Louvre, another one in Dubai, another one in Barcelona, Singapore, and Sedona so far. And so and if you're interested in those will be intensive workshops, brainstorming sessions with me and one other thought leader, author. Phil, you and I should talk about putting one together, actually. But so we're setting them up in these just the coolest places. I want to do one in Antarctica. We haven't set that up yet. But
oh yeah,
I want to do one there. So get in touch. Come to my site. You can see my name on the screen, Stu Heinecke. Come to my site. It's stuheinecke.com, and get in touch about that. And Phil, you and I need to get in touch about that.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll do that after we're done here. So much great stuff, Stu. Congratulations again, my friend, on a hell of a weed for yourself. How to grow your business like a weed. Yeah, great book, great stuff. StuHeinecke.com. Stu, I have one small piece of advice for you, and that is you have to make your LinkedIn profile. Your title needs to be Chief Weed Officer.
I thought about that, but I thought, do people go, I might change it right now.
It could be a second position underneath author is because you can have the same company can have multiple positions.
Or I'm thinking I'm going to wait until if I know that the show is going and that's the name of the show. That's I think when I'll do it.
Okay.
So we'll hold it in reserve. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Well, get ready for that. So that's good. But congratulations again, buddy. StuHeinecke.com. That's HEINECKE.com. The book is How to Grow Your Business Like a Weed. Growing like a weed is something we all can do. We can all learn from, and we can all learn from Stu. Thanks, buddy. I really appreciate you. Good time.
Thank you so much, Phil. What a great pleasure to join you.
Yeah, you